Just give it a minute.
Okay. No worries, no hurries.
Well, nobody logged in yet, so there's nobody to talk to
Okay.
online until we give them a minute to catch on.
Okay.
I can't remember whether it's January, end of January, February, or...
Look at you all here to do fancy soldering with me. Isn't it fun? I brought two of my favorite projects. The dragon. I'm sure you've all seen the dragon on the front counter. I probably won't get to do all of him because it can be a little bit intensive of a project. But I'm going to show you the techniques behind his different joints, how to make a lovely wing like this, and how to build a piano.
Oh, wow.
So I had to run to get my guide because part of it involves having something to line up your squares on. And I am not perfect enough with this yet to do it full. I've only made a couple. So, alright, I guess we'll just get started and let the online people join as they join. Alright, so first of all, tricks of 3D soldering. It's very similar. Are we good to go, George?
You're good, yeah.
Okay. It's very similar to all your other soldering. Your solder and your lead is your framework. It is better to have slightly too bulky a joint than too thin. A bulky joint, as long as you smooth it out, just makes them look hefty boned. Whereas if it's too thin, it can pop apart. So, I never actually had to discuss this before. Alright, so first of all, we're going to start with the piano. The piano is actually just a modified box. Has anyone done a box? A couple people? Okay. So it's just a modified box, different shapes, same principles. So the easiest way to get started, and there's more than one way to build a box and more than one way to build a cat, is I have here my pattern of my box bottom, because I don't want to lay it right on top of the actual box bottom. And I prefer to go ahead and use this as a guide. So since it's very windy, I'm going to tap this down so it can't go anywhere. Last thing I want is as you're trying to fiddle 90-degree angles to have your guide fly apart. The biggest help you can have is having a, I don't know about using the Morton's method for this, because I always use Homoso and a nice set of these lovely sturdy pins. So most of my method's going to revolve around that. So first we start with one side of the box. The longest is probably the easiest to use. And line it up right here along the edge of the box line. And then we are going to use pins to hold it up in place. I get to cheat because I still have marks on my sheet from the last time I pinned it. And when you use these, as you hold it upright, you're going to use the pins to get a nice 90-degree angle because it's going to naturally pin it to a 90-degree angle when you get them in there. So push them up against the glass from the side, and then push them down, and it's going to hold it, well, if I'd done it right, it's going to hold it almost perpendicular. When we get the other end in, it's going to help. Right now it's a little wobbly. So, pins on my other side. And feel free to chime in with any questions. I am very good at multitasking. So, got my pins in there. You see, holds it up at a very good angle for me, which I can adjust as I need to. Now, get my next side. This is the front of the piano, front side of the box. I'm going to get it right to here. And up with my pattern, so I've got a nice corner. I should be trying to do this in reverse, to be honest. Not fair for you all if you can't see what I'm doing. Let me move this. There. Now this way you'll be able to see what I do as I do it. Alright, front side of my box, same concept. I'm just going to use this guide on here. So let's line it up. I'm going to play with that a little bit. Nice and even with the bottom corner. of the first piece. I'm going to pin it in place just the same. For safety's sake, because I hate this thing wobbling, I'm going to do both corners.
I can't tell, are you overlapping the other piece or?
I
putting
am
up a
trying
good
to
step?
give it just a gap here at the corner, so that the corner should be open. So
Okay.
pretend there's an invisible
Okay.
rod right there,
Okay.
because we're going to make a rod out of solder. We're going to fill in that open space with solder, so we need a space for it to go. The corner should be touching, and that's how you can gauge if you have a 90-degree angle, because basically the inside lines of both parts of the copper should be forming a nice little 90-degree corner there. And even with the pin, it's going to wobble a little bit, so we're going to, have to adjust with our hands as we go. But this helps a lot. I used to freehand it, and it drove me a little mad. That's probably why I am the way I am now. That and lead fumes. Modern day Mad Hatter with glass. So easiest just start with the top corner, because you're not going to do the whole line at first. Your goal is just to get it tacked together so you can move it out of this framework. So, got my 60-40. You can use 50-50 for this. It's just a lot harder to work with because, as you know, the second you take your iron away, it's going to solidify. And I find that 60-40 works just well enough for that. So I've got my lined up corner there. I'm just going to tack the top corner. Make sure that it's bridged. And then down towards the bottom, because I never feel secure that one spot is good enough. I'm going to, around my pins here, tack in the bottom corner just a little bit, because we're not going to test that joint. We just want it so that it can be moved. Alright, now for a box, for a piano box, the trick is that we don't have a square. We have to form that curve. So we have 8 of these lovely little squares. So now we get to repeat this 8 more times. So, like I said, feel free to ask away while I do this. It's basically the same concept. I have that nice pattern on the side here showing me how they line up. Because without a guide, trying to do a curve like this, or worse, a curve that's made out of squares, can be a little bit tiresome. So, you can never have too many of these pins. They are so useful everywhere, around the house, in your home so. Sticking things in the walls when you can't find your hanging stuff. Alright, same thing. Corner is pretty much joint. I'm going to have to square the top with my fingers. Little dab of solder. Make out too much. Most annoying thing, you're trying to grab a little bit of solder, you get just enough that it rolls away instead.
You still at it?
Got a corner.
Holler when you're ready. Up you there.
Get the bottom corner. Alright. Now, since doing the sides would take quite a long time, I'm just going to show you, with what I have so far, how to solidify those corners. And it's probably exactly what you're expecting. So, it's already decently sturdy, actually, just with tack soldering 2 spots on each side. Solder is a lot sturdier than those lead artists would have you believe. There's no rivalry between copper frame and lead artists. No. Has nothing to do with the fact that the final cementing stage of lead gives me thunderous migraines. I'm not bitter. So, I'm just working my way down here. At first, just tack soldering. I want to fill that whole thing in so it has a sturdier joint. Just doing this in stages. Because you can always, the joy about copper foiling stained glass is that unless you broke the glass, and even then, you can recover from just about anything. You just won't enjoy it much. I have gotten through the entire process before, and then because I wasn't eyeing it as I went and made the mistake, these things weren't all the same height. So I got to take the whole thing back apart, which means stripping the solder and then stripping the foil and cutting new ones, because two or three of them were a millimeter to a quarter of an inch shorter than the rest of them. Made a very gappy box. So you got that. And now we're just going to continue adding solder to the point that we get a nice rounded edge. And you're going to hold it so that, you know, work with your gravity. Hold it so that the line of that is directly up. Because then, just like with your flat surface, the end result is going to be a nicely rounded flat edge. And if you hold it at an angle, instead it's just going to all try to run away. And then your hands, if you're not being safe like me and you're not wearing gloves, all that lead's going to go on your fingers instead of on the joint. If you ever have a project like this and it stops beading well, that means that you need to just lightly flux it again. Because we're going back and forth over it, and so the flux can literally all burn away. And then it's going to start blobbing instead of beading.
What did you say the advantage is to doing the little dots and stuff versus just doing one long bead?
Well, first of all, you mean when I first started with tacking it?
Well, like what you're doing now, you just sort of
Oh,
tap versus a long bead.
the downside is that you have to, in order to get a nice flat joint like this, see how it came out at the end? Nice and smooth.
Oh, yeah?
I would have to become Shiva and have 6 arms to hold this and then have my 3rd arm come over to run a bead. The problem is that, especially with a long box like this, there's no props I have yet devised that can hold this at this lovely angle for me, so I have both arms free to bead. If I had an assistant, or I could find a method that without bending this could keep this perfectly upright like this, then I would. I would probably take this in my left hand, the soldering in my right, and run a nice seam bead once I was tacked. It's just, I'm not a Hindu god. I don't have enough arms for this. So then, yep, I've got my other corner. This one, unlike the other one, I can kind of cheat. Because, see, I can lay this on the table and it stays at the right angle. So now, you'll see exactly what you were mentioning. But you want to get multiple points down, because what's going to happen if your heat spreads to those 2 joints before you have reinforcement everywhere else? It's going to go flat. It's going to bleed through and go flat. So that's why we also do it a stage at a time. We're trying not to let the heat build up so much that it's just going to, because you see that corner still has, if you're unfortunate, little gaps in it. So just like with your flat projects, if there's enough of a gap and the heat builds up, you don't have a joint anymore. You have a puddle underneath. And with 3-dimensional stuff, that means it's going to collapse as well. So you can, when you have a way that you can do this, you can put a nice running thing on it. But as you can see, it's trying to move. It's trying to angle out, because while this joint is hot, it's flexible. And so I have to keep an eye on it that it doesn't suddenly flex and I lose my box corner and it turns into a very obese angle. So, same problem here. I can attempt to use various things as props to try to get it to the right angle. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. See, in this case I can. But with that one, because this other box side is here, I couldn't do that corner. So you end up doing a very lot of eyeballing in with your hands and your props whenever you can. So here for the inside corner, it's already tacked together on the front, so I don't need to tack it. And just run it down the middle. The strength of the joint is almost entirely on the outside, where it's got that nice thick, because it's become a shape that's holding your pieces together. So whenever you do boxes, even if it's tempting because it looks delicate and filigreed, my advice is never ever use 3/16 foil. Can you guess why? You don't have a very thick framework holding that glass in. Over time, and it has happened to me, the box can pull out of the framework. Because you're moving it, you're picking it up, or the lid's moving. The glass that's flexing can literally pull right out of that because there's not a big enough H shape holding it in. So thick foil is actually better because it has a deeper channel once there's lead on it to hold your glass in place. So it's the eternal conundrum of the artist. I can have it sturdier, or I can have it filigreed and pretty. So, I brought these in because they're one of my favorite props. It's a rock. Well, technically it's a geode, but they're very sturdy, they're nice and big, and they don't go anywhere. And they have almost perfectly sheer sides. So if you have any other bookends or favorite things, I can put that there, and those are never going to move. Unless I whack at them, they're not going anywhere. So, I can do it again. Once this side comes on, none of this can happen. It's all going to be eyeballed. Because once I have fixed corners on, I can't find a way to hold it. Nice and in there. And if you have excess, just pull it out, because it's easy to get extra. Yes. So for the piano box, we now get to repeat that. Yep, see, my angle did move when I did that, but I can square it again. Because until we get the other sides on, or unless I put a really heavy bead on there, that joint's still a little flexible. But the more times you bend it, it's going to start pulling out of the foil. So you don't want to adjust it. You want to adjust it as few times as possible. Because each time you flex a joint, it gets weaker. And that's going to come up when I go on to the dragon. Because organic joints are even weaker. Yep, ouch. I have so many burn scars at this point. That's the life of the glass artist. They look at our hands, they look at our arms, and some of them might wonder, are you into self-harm? Are you okay? No, I play with glass and fire. It's a song of glass and fire. And no, the dragon is not named Dracarys. Although I guess I could make one and call it that. So I'm just lining it up because I have, as you saw, this nice little pattern that outlines the bottom of the box shape. Now the reason I don't just do it to the bottom of the box is that if I were to be doing it on top of this box bottom, the solder will often run down and then merge with the box bottom prematurely. And then if I have to keep adjusting it, the foil's going to start to pull away as I keep trying to fix it. And I don't want to have to refoil this thing repeatedly. So I just use a printed pattern. So I take two of these, and I've got them here, and I've got my next side of my box, and I'm just going to put it on there and get it in place. And same process again and again. Piano, I would almost rather, to be honest, I've done cats, I've done foxes, I've done dragons. All of those, except for boxes, have the same principles. They have organic joints. They're not square, they're not flush, they're not mathematical, they're perfect. Downside, you have to eyeball this. There's no guide, there's no form. You have to look at it and try to match it. On the upside, if it's slightly off, no one will ever know but you. A customer or a friend or a family member, whoever's receiving this, that dragon is not going to know, oh, that wing's not at the, quote, perfect angle. They just see a wing. They say it's pretty, and they're done. Whereas with a box, very, very easy for anybody to see that corner is not a corner. Also, it won't fit together. So, same concept, I'm tacking it together. Now for the side, I do not like to finalize all my joints for this because there are so many little pieces that it is very possible that I'm going to get one of the angles wrong. And so if I finalize all those joints, I have no flexibility to adjust them without really wrenching at them. So if I keep it just tack soldered at each point like that, and I only tack solder it and go all the way down, I can still, by using the soldering iron, loosen that up a little bit and adjust it a little bit so that I keep my curve right. At any point, I can honestly just take it to here and see if I'm matching up. If I'm not matching up, I can quick heat it a little bit and make a tweak. So, that's that one. I'm going to stop there with the box because unless anyone has any questions, that's pretty much the basics of the piano. when it's all finished, it will look quite lovely. There are some extra steps on there. There's a step of adding the hinge. There's a step of how to put a kickstand in. It's a little bit of brass tubing that you solder just inside and allow it that it's on a hinge so it can come up. It's like a one-ended hinge, and you put a little dab of solder at the end of the brass rod, and if you've done it right, it's a tight hinge. It'll hold itself up, so you can pull it up and it'll hold the lid of the piano open. That's how my mother displays hers. And here's Pupper. Here is the Pupper. She runs everybody. So we are going to move on to, if that seems hard, we're going to run on to dragons. The thing that so far I have not wanted to teach a class on because it requires a lot of previous experience. And I have a personal nightmare of people coming in and I have to say, I can't teach you how to do all of copper foil. So, when we assemble our dragons, projects like this, it comes in sections. You have the body of the animal. Cats and foxes and everything are the same. They usually have a flat body. You assemble that first. All of it is a finished panel essentially, and the edges are beaded. Everyone knows how to bead an edge, yes? Okay. Just in case they don't, or we have anyone online that's questioning what is a beaded edge. A beaded edge, I should have left one of these undone, is, oh, perfect. Here's one of these. A beaded edge isn't when you're not going to use cane or framing, especially for freeform projects like this where that's not possible. That can't be caned, especially when we're going to put all these joints on it. We go ahead and we tin both sides just so it'll stick nicely. And then we're going to give it a nice round beaded reinforced edge. Make sure I have enough flux on there. We're going to give it a nice rounded beaded edge by picking an end and getting that rounded bead on there and tapping it along so it stays liquid and flows. And because we tinned the edges, if there's enough solder on there, it's going to naturally overflow just the tiniest bit by gravity and grip it on both sides, giving you a U-cane channel made completely out of solder. And now, as you practice at this, you can get a nice thicker and thicker edge, but if you put too much on there, it's just going to flow off, and hopefully not on your hands. Because you want enough for it to be nice and heavy. You want it to look even, you want it to look pretty, but a little too much, and even if your hands are steady as a rock, there's not enough surface tension for it to stay there. So yeah, I could do the whole thing, but that is a beaded edge. So if you're doing any copper foil projects, you don't want to use cane, you start to do any of these things like I do, fairies and dragons and things that go bump in the night that really can't be bounded by even a nice piece of flexible lead. This is what you practice. Each of those pieces has to be beaded before you put it together, for the simple reason that once it's together, you can't get into all those crevices to put a nice edge on it. So his horns were beaded before he went on, because I'm not going to try to angle and bead inside this little crack here. And all of his legs were beaded beforehand too. They all have that nice smooth edge. And
Do you
this
ever
is
use wire for that?
wire. I have not had to. You can, and it will make a stronger edge. But for the most part, I haven't had the need to. The box, when you do the box, a wire gets used for a different reason. Around the outside of the top of the lid, it's recommended that you put a piece of wire and you solder it inside your beaded edge, hidden inside your beaded edge, because since it's wrapped all the way around, it reinforces where the foil is. As this thing is on a hinge and it opens and closes, it's going to start pulling, even with the solder, pulling this whole thing away. Mm-hmm. With the wires there, the wire keeps it clasped tightly to the glass. So, first things first, little projects like him. We need to keep him upright. Again, my friend, the rocks. So, we are going to place the rocks here. You can use anything, any object. Handy foam blocks. We have some handy blocks here. They're made of foam. I use them for light projects. He can be a little bit heavy, and I'm going to be fiddling with him a lot to try to adjust him. These aren't going to move unless I really push. The foam blocks move really easily unless you stab a pin or a screw through them to keep them in place. So here I have one of his back legs, and here is where his back leg joint is. So we're going to match it up and hold it at an angle, and they are pre-beaded. So right here, I've never had to hold it up while I do it. It's giving me a little bit of a challenge there. So right there, as we hold it up, we're going to end up putting a nice big ball joint of solder right there. So these are why I have the blocks, because that'll hold him upright and it'll keep him flush with the table. And I can tell if I have the leg nice and flush to the table as well, because I want him to sit nice and tall and proud when I'm done. And if my legs are like this, he's going to wobble like a drunken sailor.
Yeah.
So this also makes sure that all four legs are going to be perpendicular to the table. So soldering's going on. Flux it up again. It was all nice and clean. Back to the flux. So I'm going to have to turn this for a minute and show you as I go, because it's rather difficult to do this like that. Get a nice big bead on here, and just like with the box corners, the first thing we're going to do is tack it. So I'm holding his leg at an angle, making sure I'm holding it flush on the table. And I'm going to find the spot where all my solder meets and tack it together. And I lost my solder, so I'm going to get more. That's why I always have a little leading tail coming off my solder. It doesn't need to be a big joint at first. I just need the solder to kiss and merge, which this one doesn't want to do. Probably because I'm doing it upside down. It's one of those things that's really hard when you first do it, and the more times you do it, the better you get at it. I've done about 7 dragons. Once I've done 70, I'll probably do it with my eyes closed. Bring it closer. Thank you. So now you can see, and take these away and display for both my studio audience and my TV audience. I've just kissed it together here. There's just a piece of tack solder. Sorry. Forgot how slow the camera
Come
was.
closer. Now, where did you kiss it?
Right here, where the two lines meet. This is his joint on the body, and this is the back side of the beaded edge. I added a little bit more solder to my iron and merged it right here at the top of the joint. And my next step is I'm going to add solder to merge the rest of this joint here, because we want a nice heavy joint to hold his leg together, because he needs to support his own weight. Now, this doesn't have to be, you know, indestructible, because barring small children, he's not going to be yanked at. I actually made one of these as a gift for someone for their kids. I said, just make sure they don't yank at it. He said, no, don't worry. If they yank at it and something happens, they know they're not getting another one. So, a little bit of flux to make sure it all goes together. And I'm going to repeatedly just get a nice little bead on there. I'm going to merge my joints there. And I can use gravity to help me. So we're going to keep reinforcing that joint until we have a nice big rounded joint. Think of like the ball joint on your hips. We're giving him a hip joint. We want to see that he is fully joined everywhere. Like, we shouldn't see gaps. If you can see a gap, get some more solder and kiss it shut. There. Now, for the camera, we have a nice solid
Hold
joint.
it still.
Sorry.
Thank you.
We have a nice solid joint there. So you can see we have a nice solid reinforced ball joint there. And now, at least, look at what I did. I was holding it at an odd angle. So this isn't a perfect example of how you fix your work. So,
It's not.
nope. I apparently,
What happened? He's not sitting steady?
nope, his leg
It's down.
is now below his body. Because maneuvering to hold it at angles, my original tack joint must have weakened as I held it, and therefore it allowed it to move at a different angle. So now he's hopping away, and we don't need that. So we're just going to... Has anyone repaired a panel before? You know about stripping your lead away? We're just going to melt and strip the lead away, give it at an angle so where it can melt away onto the table. The table doesn't care, it's used to it. And especially when you do your first figure like this, it's going to want to do that. It can be a little bit of a challenge to hold it at just the right angle. So what you're going to do is you've removed your solder, and you're going to reapply it because you need something to work from. A little bit of flux. Because you need something to attach the leg to. Okay, so I've removed it, and I have reformed his hip joint line so that we have some nice solder to work with. Back to normal. It's why I love doing copper foil, is it's utterly forgiving. If I mess up, I can do it again. I might not be happy about it, but it's no extra challenge. So now I'm going to go back to the same step. This time I'm going to make sure that I have it right here. And I apologize in advance, but I'm going to put it at what for me is the most normal angle, which is to have it right here, angled towards me so I can see the joint, and I'm going to tack it right in place. And I'll demonstrate that tack again for you, show you in just a second once it's steady. And I'm going to want to put as much tack as I can, just like with the box. I want to try to get 2 points of contact. There. Okay. The more points of contact you have, the sturdier an object is. So now, he's been tacked in 2 spots. So even if I accidentally melt one, the other one's going to keep it supposedly at the right angle. Here and here. So, 2 points. Last time I did 1. And it allowed me to break his little leg. Poor baby. So I've got to reinforce that joint again, and this time I'm going to hold it in such a way that I'm not letting his leg move. It's a challenge, honestly. It's a challenging project. It's challenging to talk and do it at the same time. But I am golden this time. Okay. All right. So, his little leg is reformed. There's a nice solid ball joint there. And there's one, you want to make sure he sits level, which he does as long as I prop this side up. So once we have the other leg on at the same angle, which is easier now that he has one leg there, he should sit perfectly stable. Now, there's a reinforcement step that we want to do before we move onward. His leg is pretty stable, but it only has that one reinforced joint. We now essentially have one line that's keeping him in place, and one line is prone to flexing. So what we have is that we're going to form a nice bead inside, sort of like a second joint right here, a little bridge, a little gap, just a little dot of solder holding those 2 spots together, because then it will prevent it from people pushing on the outside. You know, you're picking him up, you might push his little leg in, and if there's no reinforcement there, that joint will allow it to flex, because it's a singular joint. If there's solder in here, it becomes a rod that will hold it so that you cannot push it in. So what we're going to do is we're going to get some flux right there, and we're going to form ourselves a little line of reinforcement. Because the last thing you want to do is a week from now or a month from now, you're picking him up and you squeeze a little too hard and the leg goes flat. You can fix it. You can take it back to your workbench. And you're going to build this like a dab at a time. You got to let it cool down or you're just going to have liquid lead run everywhere. So I'm dabbing a little bit in. You can build outward from where you were. See? And you just want it to jump the gap. Make sure everyone can see. You jump the gap. You need to get it bridged. And you can build outward from there. You can continue spanning your bridge wider. You just want it to be as sturdy as possible, and how sturdy it is depends on how much you want to bridge. So if it starts to look messy, that's okay, because simply applying a little bit of flux and going back to top it up is going to give you a rounded surface on top. And just never, ever stay there for too long. Because my hand is directly under that joint, and if I get that too hot, the joint is gone and so is my thumb. So you want to tap. You do a little tap and you let it cool. And then you tap and let it cool and you build your bridge. And the very last step is to smooth it, and you have to do it smoothly and concisely, smooth and be done. Don't think I can go back and smooth and smooth. No, no more joint, no more finger. All right.
Gloves are allowed.
Gloves are allowed.
You don't have to do this barehanded.
No, you do not have to do this barehanded. I'm just a little crazy. This is a case of do as I say, not as I do. All right, so we're going to move on to the wings, how the wings are constructed, because all the other legs are the same process as that. Just that now we have one leg. We can balance it. If we were to put the other leg on, this so the camera can see as well. If we were to put the other leg on, we would keep this same way, but now his leg is helping me keep him perfectly upright. And we're just going to we would put the other leg so that it's nice and flush with the table. And we would try to, from above, I can see this, I'll hold it out so you can see. I can visually try to gauge that his angle of his leg is the same. Not that it's going to make a difference, because as long as it's flush, he's not going to wobble. But we don't want to look like he's sitting cattywampus. So when I'm seeing it from above, I'm seeing this as I lay it down. And my question is how far in or out his knee is. And that's something I can just have to adjust visually. See, because I can, even having that joint all lined up, his leg is this far out, I could easily, within that same joint, give him a tiny leg or a wide open leg. So, wings. Lovely, curved, dramatic wings. Now, the easiest way to do this is I have my legs, my wings, just like the legs. They're all pre-constructed. Each piece, each segment of a wing is already put together. They're tinned, they're ready to go. So this is the final result, and these are the pieces. Now this is my favorite tool for doing this. You can get this in a model shop. It's actually meant for holding small plastic bits of models, like action figurines and everything together. It is basically a pair of pressure tweezers, and it's set in such a way that when you squeeze it, it opens, but it is high pressured to hold itself together and hold what you're doing.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
And it has a box around it, a wired-on box that will hold it on the table at an angle. I can sit it this way, or I can sit it this way, whatever I need to hold my figures. And the rocks are going to come in useful again in another 10 seconds. Now, what I do first is I'm going to start from the inside joint. And I left a lovely little extra daub of solder on there, so I better strip that away, because that will get in the way. Okay. I've got my completed wing. as a reference, but normally I would have the pattern in front of me too. I always keep a copy of the paper pattern down, just in case my brain fritzes and I don't remember how this thing I've done 12 times goes. So this is the first joint of the wing. This is the side that goes flush with his body, and this is the next joint to the next piece of the wing. Now, it's going to be really hard for me to hold another piece of wing and this wing and my soldering iron. Again, you know, I'm not a Hindu diva, so I can't have 6 arms. So this is where my little friend comes in handy. I'm going to pressure him here. I'm going to make sure this wing is, since these wings are this side up, when they finish, they're going to go on the dragon like this, curved down over his leg. I want to make sure that as I'm constructing my wings, that they're right side up. So I used it with the textured side of the glass up, so it will remind me what is up. It's Wismach, so it has, you know, that little rough rolled surface texture. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to pin it here with my little friend, and this, my little friend here, is going to keep him from moving. And it's going to hold it at this lovely angle right above the table for me. He will be my third arm. Now, it's very light. There's a chance that as I move and work with it, it's just going to go nowhere. Solution? Rock. Rocks are my friend. Let me pull this over here. More flux. Flux my edge. Next segment of wing is this one. So there I've got my completed model. So the curved edge of his wing, and I've got the textured side up, goes against this curved side of his wing. Now, even though I have props to help, anything with organic joints, as I said, is a lot of freehanding. It's a lot of eyeballing. So I prep my iron with my dab of solder so I can tack. And I'm doing this backwards for the benefit of the crowd. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this so that everyone can still see, but I can do it at a little more workable of an angle. And I apologize if this is hard to see online. So now I've got both sides up, and I want to imitate the angle of that wing. The first time you do it, no big deal, there's nothing to match. But this time I'm going to hold it in place, and I'm twisting it so that it's at the right angle to match this wing. And I've got it lined up and pushed against it. Now that's the reason I put this rock on here, is I'm pushing as lightly as I can, but without that rock, it's going to keep moving on me. With my friend rock in place, my wing goes nowhere. It'll twist a little bit in its grip, but it won't move. So now I just get it at about the right angle. It's copper foil. If we do a horrible job, we can always unzip it and do it again. I tack it in place, and while it's on here, I can go ahead and tack it in at least 2 spots. And that is the point of my friend, the pressure tweezers. So now, as I move along the wing, I'm simply just going to move to the next section. So I'm using the same angle time and again. So now I've got the middle piece held in the tweezers, and it's rotated it so I can keep working at an angle piece by piece. I don't know if this will work terribly well were this to be a much larger wing. I would have to basically put him up on a box, raise him from the surface a little bit so I could work under him, but I would still use these same tweezers. I'd probably go get a wooden box, tweezers, and put a rock on top of it. Create myself a little pressure mount. Call me MacGyver. So now the next piece in his wing, we've done this piece and this piece, is this little in-between piece. So we're going to go ahead. Here's my little in-between piece. And we just know from the pattern and from our model wing that it goes not all the way up to the top, because this last segment of wing has a bone joint along the top, and it's got to meet with that. So we're filling in this space in between first. So I flux my edges. Mr. Smooth. Get my tack bead on there and produce a new angle, and I just look at that one and I try to make sure I'm holding my fingers at about the same angle. I can always redo it, I just don't want to. So you start to get a feel for it. Once you've done the first wing, you feel that you're holding it at about the same angle to the table every time. Since you're rotating, and this is holding each piece at the same angle each time, as long as your fingers are being held, held at the same angle every time, you're going to have roughly the same angle. And the joy of this being organic is, when it's all done, even if the first angle is, say, I don't know, 29 degrees, the next one is 31 degrees, humans can't tell. He wiggled it just a little bit. It'll look like he's sunning his wings. I had one I made, honestly, that was quite a few degrees off, and I was about to take it back and go get it fixed, and the person who I was making it for said, no, it's lovely, she's moving. I'm like, okay, well, then she's moving. So I've learned not to worry about it too much. We are always our own harshest critics. Because we know in our heads as we work what we want, or what we think should be done. Whereas your customer or your family, whoever's getting this at the end, just knows how it looks at the end. So unless something's really off, it's wonderful to them. Now I was about to give myself a headache because I didn't rotate to my next piece. I could have done that, but because I'm holding it at the same angle each time, my final angle would have been off, and I probably would have had to unzip and redo. So I'm just going to the next spot, reattaching rock, and getting to my final piece of wing. Now this one is a little bit of grief because I'll unpin it for the camera and for you guys. The last one is a little bit of grief because he forms a gap. So I need to adjust the angle of that because I don't think it's deep enough. This piece right here, I don't think that's a deep enough angle. I think it's almost flat because when there's an angle, this will almost meet. If it's flat, it's going to have a big gap. And I can jump that. I've done bigger holes filled with solder, but it's going to look awkward. Here's the model. So I did fill a little gap, but it's probably only that much of a gap. So when you're doing organic three-dimensional joints, there's always going to be a little bit of wiggle room, something you're going to have to bridge. But if it looks huge, you might want to reevaluate. Not because you can't do it, but because you can do it better. So I'm going to unzip my joint. And this one didn't have that much solder on it, so the trick to unzipping these is just to continue heating it and flowing the line. Because eventually it's going to be all so warm that if you're holding it up and you're not holding the secondary piece, it's going to fall away on its own. Because the solder is going to be warm enough it's not holding together anymore. And I can sort of wiggle it in there and gently pull it away. And I'm just heating it and running it. Whoop, there we go. I'm done.
Question about what sort of flux are you using, Jesse?
I am using my favorite paste flux, no corrode. We have it here in the shop in smaller ones. This is just
It's a dirty label. I'll get you.
Yep. No corrode paste flux. Liquid flux rolls away. So especially for three-dimensional things, this is a paste, and like the waxy paste is, once you put it onto a spot, it stays right where it needs to be. It also makes less fumes. And I think it provides a really clean bead. Everyone has their favorite flux. Some people swear by Glass Star liquid flux, some people like gel. And I've just gotten really used to this paste flux because of the results it gives. It does mean, because it is waxy, you're going to clean twice as much when you're done. Your panel, your joints, whatever, this stuff leaves residue. So whether you use flux remover or dish soap, you're going to have to go back to it twice. You're going to have to clean it. You're going to feel a little invisible residue still. You're going to have to clean it again. But it saves me so much time and effort during the process that I think it's worth cleaning up afterward. Now when I unzipped it, I unfortunately moved the foil a little bit. It got a little rough on the edge, so I'm just taking the chance to smooth it, push it back in place. Looks good. It's not going anywhere. So I am going to redo that joint because I would have left myself a huge gap on the final joint to have to try to bridge. And it would have made the wing look weird. Like weird enough that someone would notice. So I've got my rock, I've got my joint. You can adjust it, pushing it further in or further out. So now what I want is to adjust my grip so that I have a little more steep of an angle. Because that's going to mean that the end is going to have less gap to jump. And I just need it tacked. I don't need it filled as a joint. Okay. So it's tacked. He's tacked in place again. There's now more of a curve to it. Once I've done, when you do the first one, it doesn't matter how angled it is because there's nothing to match. When you're doing the second one, you want your curves to match, or as close as possible. If you can't notice it, no one else will. Perfection is possible, but not necessary. So, go on to my final joint, and I'm going to see if I did a better job lining up that angle so that this is a little bit less of a headache. Now, when you're in the cutting stage for this particular pattern, you can make life a little bit easier if you leave this bone a little bit longer. That way it'll bridge any gaps. But by the time that you realize you might not have left enough wing bone, you're this far. It'd be a real pain to undo this and go cut another wing bone and start all over. So I'm going to flex my edge, and I'm going to do this. Gonna do this. Oh, I don't have my friend rock, so it's going everywhere. Okay, there is still quite a bit of gap. Probably means that in an earlier stage, I didn't give myself enough room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to angle it to get as close as I can. And we're going to jump a gap. We're going to jump a gap like a Star Wars movie. So, let me just get the wing itself together. And I'm going to show you what I mean. It's tack soldered in two places. And we see our friend Cappy Gappy right here. He's a pretty big gap. It is still doable. Never fear. You can build a bridge. So, what we're going to do is you pick a place to start from, preferably somewhere that's already solid. And we're just going to start building ourselves a little sculpture out of solder. You let it cool, going back and forth, and you can build on solder pretty well. And if it starts to be too tacky, then towards the end, too spiky, at the end we're going to go ahead and put some more solder on. More flux. And I am slowly but surely covering and filling this gap. And we're going to smooth it at the end. We'll smooth it down at the end, and we will know it's there. Because we'll know that, hey, that little joint between the two bones looks a little bit fatter than the other one. But whoever's receiving it, my experience now, they don't know. And if you say anything, they're going to say that you're crazy. Or, in case of a couple people I've known, you're too hard on yourself. Stop worrying about it. There, with that last brush, I have completely bridged the gap.
Jesse, what setting are you using on your Hako iron?
I am currently using 410. That's my standard setting for working with 60/40 solder. If you set it a little lower, the flux will be slower to move. The solder will be a little slower to move, and it will be a little more pasty, which is good for bridging gaps. I'm just used to working with it at this rate. If I turn it up a little bit higher to 460, I use that for removing old solder because it'll wash it away like water. Hotter solder runs more like water. So when I'm removing it or fixing my mistakes, I'll turn it up. When I need to build a bridge, I'll usually turn it just that slightest bit down. So now, I'm going to hold up my wings, and I'm going to ask myself, are those angles close enough that I'm not going to go crazy about it? The answer on these ones is thankfully yes.
Yeah.
That looks close enough. So now, normally I do this when he's all together, but when is my time up?
Yeah, it's about time to wrap it up and just take questions.
Okay, time to wrap it up, but if you were to get this all together, just to answer a question, pretend his front legs are on here. We're just going to say, let's pretend. There's his front leg joint, and we put his legs that they meet in front of him. So pretending those were all there, we put on his wings like this. They meet on his spine,
Okay.
and they have 3 points of support: his spine, his front leg, and his back leg. Since they're suspended, you want them supported. So that's your little dragons. And do we have any questions, either from online or from in the room?
Terrific, thank you. So those are funny numbers on the Hako. What is that, Celsius?
That, I believe, is Celsius. I couldn't tell you for the life of me what it translates to in Fahrenheit. I just know what each setting corresponds to and what I want it to do. I just memorize them almost like they're just a 1, 2, 3, and 4 to me. But yes, this is an international product, and I believe that, you know, like the rest of the world, these are in Celsius. I should probably learn them eventually. But
I get what you're saying. If I had a temperature controller on my soldering iron, it would just be a dial of 1 to 10.
And you just learn that you would work at number 3 is your default setting. Hotter is hotter and cooler is cooler. Because solder melts at a certain point, but there is no one fixed point. If you want to run quicker, you get hotter. If you want to run slower, you go colder. And suddenly, though, you're going to reach a point where it's barely moving. For that point, 50-50, because it's got a higher content, also runs slower. You have to keep your iron up hotter to use it. If anyone's used both types of solder, you probably have seen that. 50-50 is preferred for working with lead, I believe, and for working with large objects, because on most settings, as soon as you take it's so heat sensitive, it needs a higher temperature to melt. As soon as you take your soldering iron away, 50-50 tends to freeze. 60-40, you have a couple seconds where it's still molten and it can flex.
Jesse, where can we get the pattern for that dragon?
The pattern for that dragon is at beststainedglasspatterns.com. They have a lovely 3D section. Mine is a little modified. I tend to play with my patterns, although it's the first 3D pattern I ever found, and I have used it as inspiration to construct my own fox and cat designs. I started to learn the principles that, you know, once you have a body, a flat body, you have to design and choose where's everything going to attach. You decide and create within the drawing. Here's where the legs are going to attach. Here's where the tail is going to attach. Anything you want to move at a different angle has to have its own ball joint, its own socket joint, somewhere to go. And you want to make sure that it's all level. I get to cheat because at home on the computer, I have Adobe Illustrator and other graphic programs. I used to be a graphic designer. So I have the advantage of being on a computer. I can test out all the patterns. Because it's there on the screen, I can make sure that everything is the exact same size, that the size of my leg matches the size of the joint, and I can tweak it very quickly.
Okay, say bye to everybody.
Bye, everybody!